Hello, welcome to this short exploration around the notion of resilience in humanitarian emergencies and responses. I'm Tabitha Hrynick, a researcher with the Social Science and Humanitarian Action Platform, or SSHAP for short. Today we'll delve into the concept of resilience, its applications, some critiques, and how we can move towards more transformative approaches in humanitarian action. To start off, what is resilience? Well, the emphasis and many approaches to vulnerability, you can see our other video on the concept of vulnerability, have been criticized for being presumptuous, patronizing, and framing communities and community members as passive actors in need of saving through aid. Resilience is a concept that has gained traction in humanitarian circles as a counterpoint to these vulnerability-focused approaches. When used in a humanitarian context, it generally refers to the strengths, capacities, and resources of individuals and communities to anticipate, respond to, cope with, and recover from crises. These capacities and resources can be both formal and informal and can include, for example, local knowledge and customs, skills and material resources, social networks and relationships, communication channels, leadership and decision-making structures and processes, and community-based organizations or more informal community organizing. To give you an example of local knowledge and customs, during the 2000 to 2001 Ebola outbreak in northern Uganda, which was the world's largest at that time, the Acholi communities, who were heavily impacted, activated a customary system to identify, isolate, and care for the sick, and bury the dead within their own social and spiritual framework and using locally available materials. This wasn't recognized by formal public health emergency responders until much later in the outbreak. The role of humanitarian actors taking a resilience approach should be, first of all, to identify and recognize local capacities and resources, and then work to adapt responses in ways that support and build them up. By enhancing existing community strengths rather than imposing external solutions, this approach can foster more effective, immediate responses through mitigating vulnerability, but also supporting recovery and building further resilience against future shocks, ultimately leading to more sustainable and locally driven outcomes. Through a quick internet search, you can find a number of tools to help you with the first step of identifying sources of community resilience. For example, organizations like the IFRC, Oxfam, and CARE have developed participatory vulnerability and capacity assessments, which pair identification of vulnerability alongside sources of community resilience, or in the case of many of these tools, framed as capacities. CARE, in particular, has a growing range of more resilience-focused tools and resources you might want to start with, such as the Climate Vulnerability and Capacity Analysis Handbook that you can see an image of on this slide. While recognizing and working to build up communities' resilience in advance of crises is undoubtedly a good thing, and also to support resilience amidst an ongoing crisis is as well, many resilience programs and approaches have received a lot of really legitimate criticism. And it's important to keep these risks in mind so that you can avoid them in your own work. So first of all, shifting responsibility. Even if well-intentioned, resilience approaches can result in shifting responsibilities from response and recovery onto communities and individuals at the very moments that they are the most overwhelmed. In doing so, they can also tacitly excuse or be used by governments and other formal responders to excuse themselves from upholding their duties to protect and serve communities and to build and sustain the kinds of conditions in which people and communities can flourish and be resilient against crises in the first place. Secondly, resilience approaches are often power blind. This means they can be blind to power dynamics that exist within communities. Failure to recognize these power dynamics and how they can become even more stark during crisis situations can result in the more vulnerable members in groups within a community being excluded from badly needed assistance and support. For example, power-blind community resilience approaches may result in local elites gaining even tighter control of community-led decision-making processes and resources, which reinforces marginalization. So, giving control to communities while ignoring the diverse needs, perspectives, and power dynamics that exist within them actually ends up reinforcing existing power structures and inequalities. A third pitfall and risk is a bias towards the short term and to the status quo. In the context of emergencies, resilience is often interpreted to mean the ability to bounce back or to return to normal. However, a return to normal is often not only not conducive to resilience in a crisis, but it can actually also trigger new crises like disease outbreaks or conflict, and just generally hold communities and people back from flourishing and from living the kinds of lives they have reason to value, as Amartya Sen puts it. Fourthly, resilience approaches can neglect systemic issues. So approaches which shift responsibility to people and communities, which are power blind and are biased to short-term emergency timeframes and returning to normal, can neglect the broader systemic issues which drive vulnerability in the first place. In recovery or displacement scenarios, there can be, for example, an overemphasis on skills building or employment training, which, while valuable, really puts the onus on individuals to adapt to challenging circumstances, rather than addressing the root causes of their vulnerability, such as economic inequality, discrimination, and a lack of access to essential services. So how can we avoid the pitfalls of resilience approaches? A more holistic way to think about and operationalize resilience in humanitarian action is to make the goal transformative resilience. Transformative resilience moves beyond simply bouncing back to a pre-crisis state or managing short-term shocks. Rather, transformative resilience seeks to address the root causes of vulnerability and build more equitable, just, and sustainable communities. It places equity and social justice at the core of resilience-building efforts, recognizing that true resilience cannot exist alongside deep-seated inequalities. This approach challenges existing power structures and inequalities that often exacerbate vulnerabilities during crises. It advocates for participatory and inclusive approaches, ensuring that marginalized voices are heard and incorporated into decision-making processes. Transformative resilience links immediate crisis response to longer-term systemic change. It asks us to consider how our interventions can not only address immediate needs in a way which also includes and foregrounds the priorities of local people, but also contributes to building fairer, more resilient societies in the long run. In practice, this might mean combining emergency food aid programs, which build on existing resources and capacities and customs within communities, if they exist, to address food insecurity's root causes, such as land rights or agricultural practices or policies. Or it could involve disaster preparedness initiatives, again, which build on local knowledge and customs and understandings and resources, but that also tackle climate change and environmental degradation more broadly. By adopting a transformative resilience approach, the aim is to create conditions where communities can not only withstand future shocks, but also flourish and pursue lives they have reason to value. This shifts our focus from mere survival or recovery to promoting justice, equity, and holistic well-being tailored to the aspirations of communities and people who live in them. If you would like to learn more about resilience and transformative resilience approaches, SHAP has a few resources that apply these approaches to epidemic response, but the lessons are still applicable to other emergency contexts. You can find them and many other resources on our website. Thanks for watching. Do also check out our other legacy videos in which SHAP researchers break down concepts and approaches, bringing a social science lens to humanitarian issues. A complementary video to this one is a video on social vulnerability in humanitarian action.